Everybody, welcome to Spurs 9501 podcast. Welcome to all our YouTube viewers, our podcast listeners. I've got Steve Han, a Korean football expert based in LA. We're going to do a special live Q&A with Steve today. Hello, Steve.
How's it going? Thanks for having me again. It's good to be back.
No, it's a pleasure to have you, Steve. We're hoping we're going to get lots of questions for you regarding Sun and the Korean football team, etc. So before we start, why don't you give us a quick bio introduction, Steve, and just so the viewers can get to know you a bit better. Give us a bit of an intro.
Yeah, I write for goal.com, or I guess it's now better known as Goal. Now I've been writing for both Goal Korea, Goal the international editions since 2008. Primarily, most of my work is now with Goal Korea. I've been doing that for 13 years. Can't believe it's been that long already. Other than that, you can find me on Twitter. Quite active on there. And yeah, I've been a Korean football writer for much of the last past decade.
Yeah. How long have you been following the career of Heung-min Son? Since he started as a 16-year-old in...
Yes, because when he first started being covered by the Korean media, that was back when he was playing for the youth teams in Hamburg. And obviously, especially back in the days, nowadays it's quite common to see Korean footballers all over Europe. But back in, 2008, 2009, it wasn't as common to see a Korean footballer playing for even a youth club for one of the top leagues in Europe. So, he's been getting a lot of attention since then. And, obviously, I don't think even then nobody quite expected him to be as big as he is right now. But he's been covered by the Korean press for since I would say about 2008, since 2008, 2009.
Great. Just give us a bit of, because a lot of people might not know this, but give us a bit of history about Son's journey from Korea to Germany and then to Spurs. Just give people a bit of a history on that.
Very uncommon route that he took to be where he is now, because he is one of the very rare players who actually was developed through the European system, because he started playing in Germany since he was about 15, I believe. And it was actually an organized program that was being managed by the Korea Football Association. And the KFA would send promising, talented, highly rated young players to European clubs. They would strike up partnership deals with European clubs, and they would send players that way. But what's surprising about that is that, there are more than 10, 20 players who went over to Europe through that program, but Son is probably just about the only player who actually went on to become a star who's as big as this right now. So yeah, it's been quite interesting. The KFA no longer runs that program, which makes Son's rise to the top even that much more interesting, to be honest with you.
And most of the players went to Germany and European teams rather than England directly, would you say?
There were a couple players who actually went to England as well. I mean, if you remember back, long time ago when Sunderland were playing in the Premier League, there was a player by the name of Ji Dong-won who went up through the ranks of Reading FC, I believe, when they were in the Premier League. And then, but the interesting thing about him is that he wasn't like Sonny, where he, continued to play in Europe, and he made his professional debut in Europe. With G, he played his youth football in England, and then he eventually ended up going back to Korea, and he made his professional debut there, played national team football for Korea, obviously, and then he moved back to Europe. And so, with Sonny, it's a bit different. He had a very steady development throughout his youth career and into his first team football, career as well. So, it's everybody has their own different paths, and it's just that it makes it that much more interesting for Sonny, because that program, there are a lot of controversy about that as well. How well it was managed, how many of those players went on to become really resourceful players for Korea, and Son is one of the very few players who were actually able to accomplish that.
But there was a player I remember who played for Swansea, then he played for Sunderland. Is that the same guy you're talking about? Is it?
Ki Sung-young. His story is a little bit different. He grew up in Australia, which makes his path even more interesting and unique. But he was considered as one of the genius midfielders in Korea ever since he was very young. Made his professional debut in Korea, but he was such a talented player that he went over to Celtic when he was, I believe, 18 or 19. made his professional debut there. He eventually went on to become a captain for the national team before Sonny. And then he won the bronze medal in the Olympics in 2012. I remember the Korean team beat the Britain team. They played each other in the quarterfinals. That was a big game in Korea, and they ended up winning a medal there. And that's when Ki just went on to become a big star. And then he went over to Swansea, played a little bit for Sunderland, played a little bit for Newcastle as well, and now he's playing in Korea right now.
Okay, excellent. So, give us a bit. Let's talk about Son's contract. He's got 2 years left in his deal. What's your thoughts on that? What's the local rumors, and what's the general consensus on what do you think is going to happen, Steve?
It's hit a bit of a stalemate, hasn't it? We haven't been getting a lot of news recently. But like I said, last time I was on here, the story in Korea is that Son, while he loves playing for Spurs, obviously, he feels very appreciative of what the club has done for him. No question about that. I remember speaking to Son. I had an interview with him back in 2018 in the summer during the preseason, and he was he told me how thankful he is for everything that Tottenham has done for him. He loves playing for the club. I mean, obviously back then Mauricio Pochettino was the manager. He loved playing for him as well. He loved his teammates. He really loved it at the club. But at the same time, the story that's coming out of Korea right now is that Son, he has played for Spurs now for 6 years. He's played there for 6 years now, and he's obviously hungry for trophies. I mean, just like any footballer would be, and he is considering his options. That doesn't mean that he's considering, leaving Spurs or anything like that, but he is considering his options, and that's what sort of delayed, the talks about renewing his contract. But we'll just have to wait and see right now, because of the pandemic and all that. It's difficult for clubs to actually invest a lot of money in for their key players, and it's one of those things that we'll probably have a better idea once the summer transfer window starts and his talks with Spurs kind of continue for a new contract. My gut feeling is that he would eventually stay, just because of the way the market is right now, and just because of his history with Spurs. My gut feeling is that he would stay, but obviously these things can change overnight, so we'll just have to wait and see.
If he was to leave, what do you think his most likely destination would be? Any thoughts on that?
That's always the tough part, because how many clubs would be able to afford Son? First of all, Tottenham are a club, Daniel Levy, not the easiest person to strike deals with. So it would have to be one of the top 5, one of the top 10 European clubs, and very handful of clubs that you can give that label to. We're talking about, Barcelona, but we hear all these stories about how they're struggling financially. So I'm not even sure how realistic that is. Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, perhaps Manchester City, perhaps Chelsea, but that's really about it. Maybe Man United, but it's always tough. So maybe about 5 or so clubs that can actually, or you can throw PSG in there, I guess. But very handful of teams that you can put in that list. And when you even talk about a club like Bayern Munich, or even a club like Real Madrid, they already have so many talented world-class players in that position that it's difficult for them in this day and age to invest that sort of money to sign Sonny. So we'll just have to wait and see. They'll have one of those clubs will probably have to move some of their existing players to be able to afford them and to create space for him. So a lot of pieces would have to fall in the right, or if from Spurs perspective, into wrong places for him for Son to actually make that move.
Okay, perfect. I think we got our first call. We got Cam on the line. Cam, I'm going to add you to the stream. Are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Excellent. I can hear you, Cam. Go ahead. We got.
Can you see me?
No, we can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, great. I just wanted to ask. I came in a bit late, so I missed some of it, and I heard you talking about the potential move of Sonny to Bayern Munich. And it seems like since he has a few more years still to go on the contract, there's really no incentive for Tottenham to sell him. And it doesn't seem like, what do you think is the likelihood that he will sign that extension that they're offering him? And I know that he's paid a lot less than, say, the top players like Kane and Ndombele in particular, which really sticks in my throat. What's the sort of talk about him signing that extension?
It's really interesting. You mentioned the duration of his contract. I believe he has 2 years remaining in his contract, and that's a very weird. He's at a very weird stage, I believe, because once that he has 2 years left right now, and once that becomes 1 year, how do we sort of judge his value? Because in 1 year time he becomes a free. He's available on a free. And I believe, Spurs traditionally, when they renew the contracts of their key players, Daniel Levy always tries to renew with at least 2 years remaining on the deal, because that obviously keeps the value of the player as high as possible for him to, for business purposes. And like I said, my gut feeling is that Son would eventually stay, just because his options, if he were to move away from Spurs, would be limited. Like I said, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and maybe a couple of teams in England and PSG are probably just about the only teams that could afford him, and it would be really difficult for him to move away from Spurs, especially with in this day and age with the pandemic, with the financial struggles that the clubs are going through. So my gut feeling is that he would stay. The one thing that's interesting about the rumor with Bayern Munich is that we hear about this rumor almost every year in Korea. Just because his connection, his connection to Germany, just because of his background, the kind of relationship that he has with Germany. We hear all the time about rumors about him, going back to Germany, perhaps playing for Bayern Munich, perhaps playing for Dortmund. Even there were rumors about that even a couple of years ago. And it seems like I mentioned this to Ray before we were on live, but. This Bayern Munich rumor that recently came out, I believe the original source was Football Insider, and not quite sure how credible that report may be. So that always makes it tough as well. So I believe at this stage it's just a rumor for now. And when you look at the squad for Bayern Munich, they've got a lot of talented players in Son's position. So that would also make it very difficult for them to sign him. They would probably have to move one of their existing players, but who would that possibly be? They have so many great players in that position that I just don't see it happening, especially this summer.
Can I ask you another question?
Of course, Cam. Go ahead.
So, where's Son really make his money? I know he makes money at Spurs, but the amount of money he must be making in Korea. I saw a few clips. He sort of seems to sell almost any product going. He's almost like royalty when it comes to a personality there. So where's his real income? Is it really about the what he gets from Spurs? I don't think so. Am I right?
Right. Endorsements, obviously, I think for most of the, world-class athletes, for most of, the widely known sports stars, I believe endorsement probably makes up more than half of their income, really. And when you when you walk through the train stations in Korea, I would say at least a third of the advertisements would be Son endorsing some kind of product. Really, you ask any Korean person who lives in Korea to take a picture of what the train station would look like, and that picture would come back with Son all over pretty much the train stations in Seoul or whatever the big cities in Korea. So I would say endorsement deals probably make up well more than half of his income, really.
Yeah. And one of the things, I don't know if you've discussed or not, right? But I wanted to say, when you look at Korean football, you look at Asian football in general, you've got Son, and then you sort of drop off a cliff. Are there more up and coming Sons in Korea?
That's always really difficult to say. That would be equivalent of me asking an English person, "Is there another up and coming Harry Kane?" Really? Of course there could be. But that always makes it difficult.
In the team, do you see anyone else in the Korean national team that is at Premier League, at the top 6 Premier League level?
Anyone close to Son? No, I don't see a player who can. But that I could always be proven wrong.
There was that
players.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
so that 6'5" defender.
Yeah. Who's that defender that we're looking at? Tottenham are looking at. Yeah, there's a defender.
Really tall defender.
Oh, Kim Min-jae. We're talking about
Yeah.
Kim Min-jae. Oh no, he's obviously one of the top up and coming players in Korea. There's no doubt about that. But his situation right now is really ugly, to be honest with you, because he's playing in China. He's making $4 million per year, which is more money than what most of the Premier League clubs could afford, and that's saying something. You know what I mean? But the bright side of that for people who want to see him at a European stage is that his contract expires at the end of this year in December. So as of now, he will be available on a free in January. And obviously, I believe the talks with Tottenham, it actually got to a pretty advanced stage last summer. So maybe that could rekindle. We'll have to see. And I believe based on what I've heard, Lazio in Italy were actually a lot closer to signing him than Spurs were. So it should be really interesting in the summer when he'll only have 6 months left in his deal, and when he's available on a free in January, that should certainly make things a lot more interesting. Really.
Okay, I have a final question.
Just related to your question. Just related to your question. Yeah. What is Son's estimated annual earnings? Do you have any idea about that?
I have no idea.
So you must have some idea. What's the rumors?
Yeah, I mean, oh man, God, when there's a baseball player by the name of Heung-min Ryu who's playing in the major leagues in the U.S. And they are, and Ryu and Son are obviously the two of the highest paid sports stars in Korea. And Ryu, his contract alone with the Toronto Blue Jays, I believe, is about $20 million US dollars. Yeah. And his son is just about the only player who can rival that. So that, I think that gives you a pretty good idea. And that's just salary itself. Yeah, exactly, from his team, and we're not even taking into account the endorsement deals, things like that aren't even disclosed. So Yeah, no,
that's good. Go ahead, Cam. Sorry,
just a final question, really, and that's really, I mean, it's a difficult one, because I mean, a player like Son, being really the importance that he has to the national team, to the country, and being the Asian Player of the Year on year, puts a lot of pressure on the player. And I mean, of course, he had a good start to this season, but he has tailed off a lot, whether it's tiredness or whether he's not getting the service, or I don't know. How's that viewed in Korea? I mean, what do people think? I mean, is he constantly expected to score and perform?
That's very interesting, because Korean fans, obviously Son, the standard that Korean fans have for Son is obviously very, very high. When there's a drop off in form, that is news in and of itself. But there's a pretty, I would say, a lot of Korean fans are actually critical of Jose Mourinho for the way he uses Sonny, and I'm not sure if most Spurs fans would agree with that or not. I mean, obviously, I guess that's up to the opinions of a lot of the people, but Korean fans aren't very happy with the position that Son is playing under Jose Mourinho, because they believe that he's playing a bit too wide. He's playing a bit too like an out-and-out winger almost, and obviously, Korean football fans, they want to see their stars scoring every game. They want to see their stars being put in a position where he can score goals, on a weekly basis. So that's been one of the criticisms on Jose Mourinho from Korea, and a lot of Korean fans actually believe that Son plays too much defense in every game. So they want to see him score goals. Make no mistake about that. So I would say that Son himself hasn't been criticized as much for his slight drop-off in form, but I think a lot of criticism is on Jose Mourinho.
That makes sense.
Okay. Feel free to ask another question. We've got Steve here. If you've got any more questions, please.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I wanted to say, I mean, last time, I'm actually in Florida, so I know you're in LA.
Oh, you are? Okay, cool.
Yeah. But when I was in 2019, when I was in England and I went to a few Tottenham games, I was impressed that about 10% of the stadium were Korean fans. Now, you're looking at about at least, I mean, seriously, there was not a row of seats where there wasn't a Korean fan sitting there. And they were all idolizing Son. He didn't really give them much time because he was concentrating, focused on the game. But that's some serious income for Tottenham. Serious income. Right. And the other thing that I noticed was they were head to toe in Tottenham gear. So you're talking about flights, hotels, all of that stuff. That's a pretty big income. I mean, in the last year or so with the coronavirus, I mean, there must be some pretty big pent-up demand for people to fly over when they can to go and see them. Will we see an explosion of Koreans coming over to Spurs?
I'm actually quite surprised that Tottenham hasn't had a preseason in Korea yet.
Right.
Because you imagine that happening, it would be like that would be off the charts, really. The game would be sold out. There's no question about that. I'm assuming it'll be pretty difficult now because of the pandemic. But I'm actually quite surprised that the first 5 years that Spurs have had Son, they haven't had a preseason in Korea, because from commercial standpoint, that would be one opportunity that Spurs could really capitalize. So when and if this pandemic ever stops, I wouldn't be very surprised if they go to Korea for one of their preseasons.
But all right, and then I just you want me to carry on? I will.
Yeah, carry on, Cam. It's fine. Absolutely. Yeah.
Question I wanted to ask was, I mean, obviously, you live abroad in not in England, and you see a lot of soccer fans all around the world and stuff like that in the US, and you always find that it's either Man United, Manchester City now, Chelsea, Liverpool, and maybe Arsenal. You very rarely find as many Tottenham fans in the general public. So,
Right.
how big are Spurs now because of Son in Korea? I mean, are we bigger than Manchester United, Manchester City, and all these clubs?
Manchester United, a little bit difficult for Korea because I'm sure Ji-sung Park used to be one of the big. He was back in 2000s. He was the son of Korea.
Yeah, of course he was.
And I would say that now Sonny is probably the Ji-sung Park of Korea now. That's how I would compare it. So Manchester United, obviously, that's how most of the Korean fans were introduced to the Premier League. Mm-hmm. So, Manchester United are probably the biggest European club in Korea, to be honest with you. But their popularity has been fading a little bit because obviously the last 10 years, so it's been a struggle. I wouldn't say 10 years, last 5, 6, 7 years have been a struggle for them, really. And Tottenham, outside of Manchester United, probably the biggest club in Korea, to be honest with you.
I'm glad that you raised the Park thing, because when he was playing at Manchester United as a Premier League fan, I was living in England at the time. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we all thought was that Ferguson had signed him just to sell shirts and to expand his base in Korea. He really got game time, or was really seen as a serious player in the Premier League. Yeah, he'll come on here and there, he'll do a bits and pieces. But you can't say that about Son, because Son is actually a serious player. He is a coveted player. Most teams probably make the top 11. You make the first 11 of most teams in the Premiership. So that makes a difference.
Well, definitely. They're completely different styles of players, to be honest with you. Ji-sung Park, obviously he was a good player. He's a legend in Korea, no question about that. And for the national team, Ji-sung Park probably played better than Son is playing for the national team right now, because Ji-sung Park, he's had many landmark moments in the World Cup for Korea. He scored a goal in 2002 World Cup, a winning goal against Portugal. Yeah, Portugal, that put Korea through to the knockout stages for the very first time in history. And then in 2006 World Cup, he scored an equalizer against France that was obviously huge for Korea. And 2010, that was when Korea advanced. Korea went through to the knockout stage for the first time on a foreign soil, and Park Ji-sung was obviously a key player, scored a goal against Greece in their first game. So, he's had many landmark moments for the national team, and that's a bit of a difference with Son. I mean, Son has obviously had his moments with the national team as well. Yeah. The goal against Germany, the goal against the Mexico, things of that nature. But, where Korean football was back when Ji-sung Park was playing for them, it was a little bit different than now. And he really put the Korean national team on the map. So from that standpoint, he'll always have a special place in the hearts of many Korean football fans. But with Son, it's a little different because he's a different kind of player. He's a goal-scoring player. He's an exciting player. Whereas Park was more of a workhorse. He was more of a defensive player. People called him the defensive winger. He plays for the team, things of that nature. But Son is a little bit different. He's in the spotlight. He scores goals. So it's obviously I would say that if Ji-sung Park is a player who put Korea on the map, Son is probably a player who really just elevated how Korean football is perceived by many football fans around the world.
Can I just ask one last thing, then I'll go and I'll leave you.
Stay on the line, Cam. It's fine. It's absolutely fine.
You just sparked
you asked some really good questions.
2002 Korean performance at the World Cup, obviously phenomenal, sensational, etc. But my question is slightly different. Goose Hiddink, it's rumored, was given an island by the Korean people or government for his performances there. Is that true? And does he still own it?
He never got his own man-made island. No, he didn't. But he did get an honorary citizenship, which is saying something. He got his honorary citizenship. Korean people in general, I'm sure many of you guys know, we're very conservative people. Yeah. We're very conservative people, and for us to hand him an honorary citizenship, that speaks a lot about what he's done for Korean football and for Korea as a country.
Wow. Okay.
I mean, one thing Cam and me always discuss on our post-match analysis is: do you think Jose Mourinho is the right type of manager that can get the best out of Son? Because you said Son likes to play in a certain position. Here he's having to do a lot of tracking back, etc. Steve, do you think that fits his game or not?
I do think
out with Mourinho.
I do think he's capable of playing that role, but it's probably not the best role that he could play. That's my opinion. And Son is a team player. He never complains about the role he plays in games. You very rarely see Son complaining. The only time I've seen Son complain ever in my career as a football writer was when the pitch conditions were really poor, when Korea were playing in a really critical World Cup qualifying games at home. That was the only time I've ever seen Son complain about anything publicly in interviews.
That's just a South Korean thing anyway. The people are quite, conservative. They don't tend to shout and scream a lot. It's a Korean thing as well, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure you guys remember Ji-sung Park from Man United. He's never complained ever in his career.
Even when he got kicked from pillar to post, he'd just get up and get on with it. He never once.
There you go. There you go. I would say actually Sonny is probably a bit more feisty than Ji-sung Park was. He doesn't like to take crap from the opponents, but he's always obviously Son is also a team player. He plays a bit of a different role for the national team because he's given the responsibility to lead the team as the captain. So he does have to play a bit more selfishly when he does play for the national team. But overall, I mean, the character of Son, you very rarely see him complain about anything.
Okay. We lost.
Sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear me. I've lost the sound a bit. So do you
we lost your video completely for a second. Wow. I mean, that's interesting. Yeah, I just wanted to say that. I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned the frustration with Mourinho in relation to Son. But what I mean, and it's very hard not to agree with that. But look at the goals he scored this season and his partnership with Harry Kane, which has produced more. The run that he's got in the team. For Mourinho, he's a go-to player. For Pochettino, he never ever was, really. I mean, for the first 2 years, we even wondered why we had him, why we even signed him, because he would hardly ever get off the bench.
Right.
So that's an interesting take, because Mourinho, you have to accept that whatever we say about Mourinho, for some reason, he loves Son.
Because I believe that's because the way Son is on and off the pitch, really. He's a team player, and we all know how much Mourinho loves that. You remember how much he loved Jesse Lingard when he played when he was managing Manchester United. And obviously, I think Son Heung-min is a much more talented player than Lingard is, but I think it's because of the character of Son. He's always willing to put in a shift for the team, always willing to play for his team, puts the team first before him all the time, especially when he plays for Tottenham. I think that's his characteristics. And Son has come out to the Korean press as well and said, Jose Mourinho has been great for me. So from Son, from his side, he's been very supportive of Jose Mourinho. So I think their relationship is probably, I would imagine it's very, very good.
But he's getting a run in the team, isn't he? And if he gets another, I think they've already got it. I think they've broken the record of partnership in the goals and assists of the front two, Kane and Son. So, and that goes back to, I think, Blackburn, when Blackburn won the Premiership, which was a long time ago.
Right.
So I think, that's pretty special. So one of the things that hits me is that the frustration of playing Son so wide, the frustration of expecting him to run onto everything and just be, chase everything down and play on the counter with very little support must be very, very frustrating. But at the beginning of the season, it really did pay off. And I mean, it seems like Son is turning more provider now than he is actually scoring goals.
Right. And it's really it was a bit of a surprise to see almost Harry Kane almost playing a support role and Son getting on the end of his passes and scoring goals at the beginning of the season, which was really refreshing for me. And one of the things that a lot of Korean fans talked about, especially last season, was when Christian Eriksen left. He was one of the best playmakers that Son has ever played with in his career. And when he left the club, the concern amongst the Korean fans is that Son is no longer going to have that player who can support him as well as Eriksen has. But to see Harry Kane play that role for him, it's been a bit refreshing as well. And with Tottenham right now, I just see the way that they play. I think their reliance on Harry Kane, their reliance on Son Heung-min is really I don't think there's too much opposition on that from the Korean fans and from the pundits in Korea. But one of the biggest things that I have noticed is that Spurs, with Jose Mourinho's size, traditionally are very defensive. But Spurs, their ability defensively, it's been questionable to say the least. And I think that's been one of the main reasons why they just couldn't grind out the results like as well as other sides led by Jose Mourinho has. So that's been one of the biggest frustrations from what I've seen, really.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of Son's position, if he doesn't sign a contract, I think very soon, and he gets to a year left, then I think he's going to leave. That's my view. That we'll get a good idea of what his intention is there. What do you think,
Right.
Steve and Cam?
Right. No, I agree. If he, I would say that if he doesn't sign that contract extension this year, things could get a little bit scary for Spurs. I would say.
Yeah. But then, doesn't that lead on to the question that for Korean fans, where would they like to see Son go? I mean, they probably see him as they would like to see him at a Real Madrid or a Barcelona, realistic or not realistic, but there may be a big push there saying, our best player should be at a bigger club.
It is a fantasy amongst the Korean football fans to one day see him play for Real Madrid.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, I'll put it at that. But a Korean footballer playing for Real Madrid would be a fantasy for anybody, really. Playing for Barcelona or Real Madrid, that would obviously be, because that you could say that about any footballer in the world, really.
Yeah, of course.
So Real Madrid would be the ultimate move that Son could make. But really, outside of Real Madrid and a couple of the other clubs that I've mentioned, who could really afford Son, really? It's really difficult to tell. Real Madrid, but we're talking about a club that could possibly go on and sign Kylian Mbappe. They could possibly go on and sign Erling Haaland. So will they be content with signing Son? We'll just have to wait and see.
Or even Harry Kane, they could sign.
Right. No, there you go.
But Steve, when you say whether they could afford him, obviously they factor in the merchandise sale, the merch sale, and all the global, all that stuff they can make, shirt sales, all that stuff. So that's a really high contributory factor. He's so popular in Korea. You add that factor in, and then the numbers start to add up a bit, I think.
Right, but when you take into account that the club that they would have to deal with is Spurs, we all know how much of a struggle it was for Luka Modric. We all know how much of a struggle it was for Gareth Bale when they were moving from Spurs to Real Madrid, and to see Son go through that. Imagine a summer just with Daniel Levy pushing Son's deal to Real Madrid to the very last minute of the last day of the transfer window. Korean football fans would literally, I can't even imagine what the reaction would be, really, to be honest with you.
He's also, at the end of the day, Daniel Levy's a businessman. So if he doesn't sign within a year, he's not going to lose him for nothing. So he's got a better chance of leaving, I think.
Right, and he's a very respected football person in Korea, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Cam, did you have any other questions, or for Steve while I got you?
I think that was pretty informative, very interesting to take those questions, and I suppose
feel free to stay on the line, Cam, if you want.
Sorry?
Feel free to stay on. Feel free to stay on if you want to join the conversation.
As a Spurs fan, I think the most worrying thing is that most of I suppose in Korea, most people would think that we've won nothing. So we've got the best of your players. We've got the best Korean player. We've got the best English player in those countries, respectively, and yet and they both play together very well. And we've won absolutely nothing. And I think that for the fans in those countries, including in England and including us as Spurs fans, would want to see those players for all the service that they've done to go out and win something. I'm just hoping it will be with Spurs, but listening to it's pretty depressing to think that probably won't be the case, especially the way that Manchester City are playing. I don't even think we'll get through to the Carabao Cup, and I'm sure that will have a lot of bearing on where Son sees himself in the future.
Sonny, he's 28, 29 now. The next move is going to be his last big move, I think. So, I think he's going to be really careful about where he goes and what he does there. And as Steve said, he's like anybody. He wants to win trophies. He wants to have medals that he can show his grandkids. So, let's see what happens. quick question, Steve. Then we come towards the end. What about the national team? How are Korea doing, and how is Son doing? Give us an update on that. That should be quite interesting, I think.
It wasn't very fun for Korea last time out. I believe it was last week. They played against Japan, their biggest rivals in Asia, next door neighbors almost, from a geographical standpoint. The game ended. It was 3-0. Korea lost. They didn't have Son. They didn't have several of their European-based players. Wasn't the greatest game. They didn't have a shot on target until there was about 10 minutes left in the game. It wasn't very fun. And the manager Paulo Bunto came out after the game in a post-game press conference, said that, had we had Sonny, had we had some of our other players from Europe, would he have won this game? For me to say yes would be obviously that wouldn't be a good look on me. That's what he pretty much said. But you can't help but to think that had this team had their captain, Sonny, and some of their other star players from Europe, they obviously would have, the quality of performance would have obviously been better. But it wasn't a good look. And then the prior to the game, you see, I think Son Heung-min posted something on Instagram, showing his support for his teammates, but it wasn't a very good game for Korea. And the backlash, it's still ongoing, really, because anytime you lose to Japan and Korea, it's rough times. Yeah, it's rough times. Especially the fact that Korea, I think it's the first time Korea didn't have a shot on target deep into the second half against Japan. It was probably the first time in history that ever happened. So wow. It's the reaction in Korea, the backlash is fierce right now.
Can imagine.
Okay, excellent. I mean, Steve, before let's close off now. Is anything you wanted to add? Anything you wanted to say as we close off?
I think that's about it. I think that's about it. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for your time. Cam, thanks for your questions. That's really good. We'll sort of convene in a couple of weeks, I think, Steve, and then we'll go through what's happening on the side. But thank you again for your time. Thanks, Cam. Thanks for all our viewers, all our podcast watchers. Thanks for all your attention and your questions. And take care. We'll speak to you soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.